to update the story of David and Bathsheba. The 1951 film, David and Bathsheba, was an amazing job done by Henry King to recreate the biblical narrative. However, his vision was best suited for the 50s and resonated well with that audience. In order to recreate this for a contemporary age, we had to go with an entire modern approach. Now personally, I believe that the most important part of this was to set the tone of the film. And in order to do this, we had to stray away from the epic, grand sound that Alfred Newman brought to the original production. And the composer we went with was Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman has an extensive history working with dark films, but always manages to bring another element in, like love or passion, and that was exactly what we were looking for. And he was able to combine the ideas of guilt and grief with this darkness, and that was perfect, the perfect emotions we were going for the more pivotal and climactic scenes in the film. And finally, his extensive use of the piano in his scoring really allowed the viewer to be guided towards understanding that the piano was a very pivotal and an important symbol in the film.
With the original film being placed in a biblical setting, we decided to change ours to a more contemporary art to target a larger audience. The contemporary setting brings us about to deal with gangs and guns as opposed to dealing with kingdoms and kings. We'd also be dealing with drug lords and stuff like that in a more modern era. The plot twists in this movie are going to be more related to the modern day and age in terms of weapons used and stuff like that. We'd be talking about guns and modern warfare type things that would be seen in gangs and drug-related crimes. In terms of the religion that we're talking about, in the time of the 1950 film, it was targeted towards being filmed as the people of Judah. In our movie, we're going to be changing it a little bit to match modern times, so we'd be changing it to a more of a Roman Catholicism type gang infrastructure, just because that is a more modern, it's a religion that is accepted more widely right now, and it would kind of allows for the audience to relate more to the audience, to the movie.
We decided to choose Boston as the central setting for this movie because of its rich Irish influence. Considering the fact that David, the main character, comes from such a strong Irish Catholic background, we felt that there's no better place than Boston. Another main reason why we chose Boston was because of its notorious gang crime activity, specifically between the 1960s and 90s. The storyline within this film draws its inspiration from the two infamous Irish-American organized crime groups, one being the Winter Hill Gang and the other the Charlestown Mob, both of which were prominent forces in the history of Boston for much of the 20th century. We incorporated real events from the Boston Irish Gang War, which started in 1961 and lasted until about 1967, to give it more of that real feeling. The gang war was fought between the Winter Hill Gang, led by James Buddy McLean, and the Charlestown Mob, led by the brothers Bernie and George McFarlane. The two gangs had peacefully coexisted for a number of years until one incident when a member of the Charlestown Mob made an advance at the girlfriend of a member from the Winter Hill Gang. This led to major conflict between the two gangs, which we use as a foundation to show the interaction between David and Ivory.
Well, while we're on the topic of language, the language used in this film is a lot different than what we had in the original movie line. The language is more of a Boston dialect to match where our setting is at the moment, and we're just trying to, although it takes away from the biblical setting and the biblical context of the movie, it still allows for a wider audience to be targeted. To make up for what we lost in biblical context in terms of our language, we decided to just add a few biblical quotations subtly through the movie from the story of David. Religion is a large contributor to the language that we use in this film, and as I mentioned earlier, the language that we use is based on a Roman Catholicism religion, while we are still mentioning passages from the Bible.
So Susan Hayward played the role of Bathsheba in the 1951 biblical epic, and she was definitely appropriate for the role and what the director was intending to do with that film. She definitely played the role of a femme fatale. She was both innocent in portraying herself as David's lover and talking to us about how she felt that her husband wasn't loving enough and giving her that companionship she needed in a husband. And she even, so you feel bad for her, so you feel like you want to connect with her and feel bad for her, but at the same time you're able to see the mischievous and like scheming ability she has to plot her own husband's death alongside David. And for this role, we try to look for that femme fatale character, and Kate Beckinsale came up. She has doe eyes. You definitely think she's innocent, but she has that ability to have that action character to her because she has so much experience with it. She's been in Underworld, in Whiteout, in Total Recall, so she definitely has the ability to be like a gangster female or a gangster chick, but at the same time, definitely have the audience take her side when she tries to explain why she would do such a thing to her own husband.
One of the main similarities we see with the role of Beth between our movie now and the movie that was filmed in the 1950s is that Beth still maintains her role as a strong woman character. We see that she is very much more talkative than in the biblical scriptures, so we try to maintain that. Now in the 1950s, when feminism was very up and coming, so it had a very bold statement for the actress playing Beth Sheba in the original movie to have a large role. Now it's not as much of an uncommon thing for women to have that role, so she's still portraying herself as that strong woman. In the movie, in our movie, it's more of a different take because she's much lonelier with her husband as he's incarcerated, as opposed to in the previous film where her husband's away at war. We use this incarceration to make sure that there's some sort of distance kept between Beth and her husband Yuri, and that distance is what causes Beth to be lonely and attracted to the power of David. David being a friend of Yuri, she can see a lot of the same traits in him, and she's very much drawn towards him as a person, and that's where the story really starts to pick up.
There were a few scenes in our film that we decided to do a direct adaptation of the original film. And the first was the famous scene where David is watching Bathsheba bathe on her rooftop. And in order to make this more relevant for today's audience, we decided to use a body, or Kate Beckinsale's body, reflected or projected through a steam shower. And not only that, but we decided to make her role, Beth's role, a larger part of this scene. And what this does is that this makes the viewer not only see the lust and the wanting from David's character, but it also projects the power that the female character has in this relationship. So as you can imagine, this scene was very tricky at first. And it was only until I got the help of Danny to put the music on top of this that I really feel comfortable putting this in the film. And that was because those sharp musical cues really guide the audience to understanding that this is an eerie yet seductive and there's a hint of love in there with a little bit of the strings that's showing through, and it just works so perfect with this scene.
Noble man that's always looking for justice in everything he does. So, in his roles particularly. So, it only seemed right to look for a character that would do or present himself with that authority and leadership that Gregory Peck does in his films. When Guggen, the director, and Farhan came to me and talked to me about wanting to have like a gangster kind of spin to the story of David Bathsheba, I immediately thought about maybe using Christian Bale. And I think it's because of his ability to present himself with authority and with leadership in all the Batman trilogy movies that we've seen and have done so well. But in addition to that, just his ability to have that like dark character, to bring that type of darkness that we want to have in a gang leader, and that's what David would play in this film. So the role of Uriah, the captain of David's army, was played by Kieran Moore. And Kieran Moore usually plays roles of the hero as well as the role of a villain, and he actually incorporated both personalities in his depiction of Uriah. He was a villain in the perspective of Bathsheba. She thought that he was a horrible husband, was not a companion to her, and villainized him for doing so. At the same time, he was a hero. He was so dedicated to his work, to his king, to David, to him, to their cause, to God, and he was just a righteous person. So he was definitely a hero at the same time in the movie. Just to play on that idea of a hero and villain in one person, we wanted to look at Joaquin Phoenix because he's known to play those roles, to be able to incorporate both the villain that he was able to play in Gladiator as a ruthless king, as well as his ability to be a heroic firefighter and to sacrifice his own life in Ladder 49. So he definitely has both characteristics, and we think that his ability to incorporate both into the role of Uriah in this gangsterized twist to the film will definitely bring more to the film.
I know this is gonna happen.
While looking at David and Yuri and the relationship that they have in the previous film in the 1950s compared to the film that we have now, David and Yuri are much more close in this movie. Now they're leaders in the ranks. They're about the 1 and 2 position of the gang, David being 1 and Yuri being at the 2. Yuri here, we can see, is a lot more well respected amongst his people. He's not just a random person as he was in the 1950s movie. Now that respect that the gang has for him, that's what causes a large rift closer to the end of the film when we see that David is exposed for his crimes that he commits with Beth and against Yuri. That's what causes a very large rift between David and his gang, and it plays a large role in the movie. Now, Yuri is still killed by David the same way. There is just it's sort of just like a hit. It's not really a direct killing on his own part. And with Yuri being in prison before he dies, that's what causes his wife to be so lonely and causes his wife to be drawn to David, just like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Beth. Now when we go to David, David is still this well-respected character that we have in the film. I mean, in the original film, he's the king. He's known for his nobility, for his compassion, for his valor. And when we come to this, we're still looking at David as this well-respected character, but it's for his different traits. It's for his violence, it's for his crime, and it's for his bloodthirst. People still respect him as the leader because he has earned their respect out of fear and not out of trust, how we see in David in the original film. The respect that David holds here is one and the same, and it really allows for the film to show the character change and progression of David as he starts from the beginning and how it moves to the end.
The second adapted scene that we decided to do was the scene of the initial romance between David and Beth. And in the original film, they're laying down in green pastures, there's bright sunlight, everything's happy, and everything is right in the world. They are even interrupted by a shepherd boy, but they don't seem to mind. It's a very happy and open and lovey scene, but to make this a more realistic rendition, we decided to add a paranoid feeling with this scene. And the first time they meet on that secluded boardwalk, you get the idea that pan shot, that goes all the way across the entire area. And what that does is it effectively gives the idea of searching and being paranoid that someone is watching. Now, while the relationship between them evolves, we see less and less of these paranoid shots, and a brighter environment. The sun is shining more, and at this point, you realize that David and Beth no longer feel any guilt or shame for what they're doing. And it's a sad realization because at this point you realize that David has lost all the love that he had for his friend Yuri, his brother essentially, Yuri, and all that respect is gone.
So, in order to create this atmosphere of freedom and isolation from the public eye, we decided to set their meeting spot near a boardwalk in a remote forested area in Forest Hills in Boston. The story of how we actually came across this set is actually pretty interesting. So, when this project was first starting out, I was in the Boston area just trying to figure out, just trying to get a feel for the landmarks and the people of the area. On one of my Saturday morning jogs, I was making a jogging trip through the forest and ended up getting lost. So about 30 minutes after losing my way, I managed to find a way to a more open part of the forest to see where I was. And that's when I stumbled upon a boardwalk. And I knew right away that this is where David and Beth were supposed to meet. So it really helps that this area really helps that kind of quiet, detached, secluded kind of ambiance that we're trying to create here.
So Raymond Massey played the role of Nathan in the 1951 film, and he is known to have played the role of Abraham Lincoln, I think, in 4 productions. So his voice is very powerful, and he definitely has the voice of a prophet, and I think that's what they incorporated into the 1951 film. They definitely played with the idea of presenting him as a character that was able to be the voice of God. And that was his role in that film. But in the film that we're making now, just to kind of add to that gangster twist, we want to encourage Nathan not only to be a religious figure, but to be some sort of companion for David, a confidant, someone who will encourage him to seek further reasoning in his actions, someone who will provide him some sort of spiritual support, as well as that friend that David can depend on talking to, telling him his deepest and darkest secrets. And this role is going to be quite hard to do, and we understand that, being a religious figure as well as being a friend to a gangster, the lead of a gangster, of a gang. So we looked into someone who's had experience with this, and so we looked at Father Kellen Ashby, who is played by James Cosmo in the hit series Sons of Anarchy.
Vengeance of a distraught father. Something every Irishman would understand.
And we definitely think that with his history, with that production, and with his ability to be both a religious figure as well as connect with gangsters at a different level in terms of building some sort of companionship with them, he'll bring that history and relationship and his experience to this film and make it a better film.
When writing the role of Nathan in this film, I had a lot more fun working with this. As in the original film, he was the prophet, and he had this counter power towards David being the king in this movie. Here we decided to make Nathan and David have this close relationship, but still be on either sides of the coin, while Nathan being the priest in the Roman Catholic Church, which plays such a large role in this film, and David being the drug lord and the crime lord, while still maintaining their friendship. They may not agree politically, but Nathan had always been there as a friend for David. Now, the reason why we chose Nathan to be a priest of Roman Catholic descent is because where our gang stems from, and this is just a little bit of background story, is that this gang stems from the IRA terrorist organization that is located in Ireland. So in terms of Nathan, his Irish presence kind of adds to his friendship with David, as well as adds to the overall storyline when things start to go south for David at the end of the film.
So, the church was one of the most integral components of this film. As mentioned, David was brought up in a very devoted Catholic family, and he was a regular member of the church congregation. He would go there to seek inner peace, to seek guidance, to thank God, to seek repentance from God. So throughout this film, the church is and always has been that safety place in David's life. So for the church set, we decided to use St. Stephen's Roman Catholic Church in Boston. This church, which has been around for about, I think, 300 years, so it has a really, really rich history in Boston. It holds significant value for the Catholic population in Boston. We feel that it provides that antique feel that we're looking for in when David goes to church and talks to Nathan.
Now, the most controversial idea that I brought forward for this film was to adapt the climax of the film. And many people objected, and it was very difficult for me to work with this idea that people are not going to enjoy this, but eventually it all fit together and all came together. And so, although there's no outward search for redemption in the eyes of God, as it was in the original film, there's still the underlying message of the scene. It's still the same. We made a few controversial relationships as we changed the idea of the Ark of the Covenant into his gun. And instead of David touching the Ark of the Covenant to give himself to God, to essentially end his life if he's not worthy, he uses the handgun and attempts his suicide. And so, as you know, in the original film, David has redemption from God, and he doesn't die from touching the Ark, but has these memories of his childhood and his original love for God shown to him. Same way, as David sits down to pull the trigger, the gun misfires. And this moment, this spark, just brings him back to the montage of his memories as a child, being the innocent boy coming up in the world in Boston, and what he had to do to get where he was. Now, this is a very, very powerful scene in the movie, as you can imagine. So the silence of the film when David comes and sits down at the piano has a profound effect on the audience, and myself included. What it does is it really puts everything into perspective for the character, because everything in his life is crashing down. He's lost his friends, he's lost his newborn son, and he's even lost his respect in society. People are even coming to kill him, but yet there's silence. And you get that feeling that this character might actually go through with ending his own life, and he tries to. So what we decided was to bring the memories of his childhood when he starts playing the piano. That's when the silence is first broken. He brings out the sheet music for the piano, the Ivory Green piece that was written specifically for this film, and he instantly remembers all the good that he was and everything in his life that he wanted to be. And so he decides that he can return to his life as he used to be. He's not done, he's not dead to everyone. There's still a chance for him to be the man he once was. And this scene, we just wanted to show that this film is not a love story entirely of David and Bathsheba, but more importantly, it's the idea of a man and his search for his own redemption and his own life. And it's the story of David.